Today, we're looking at Private Reserve's Foam Green. Hi, I'm Adam, and I'm an ink guy. I get inks, test them, and share the results with you. Now, Private Reserve's Foam Green is a green ink. And to make sure I have a range of experience with this ink, I do the writing samples. I then put it into a different pen for a day. I then put it into a Pilot Metropolitan with a medium nib to take my notes for this video. But before we get to the writing samples, let's look at the sciencey bits. Up first is the chromatography, and I agree with Vita that I've learned a lot by doing multiple chromatographies. The one on the left is done the way it's supposed to be done. I put a line of ink down and immediately put it in the water for 10 to 15 seconds. And we see that for the most part, the ink is fleeing up the page. It's running. Now it does leave some very light yellow behind, and you start to see some of the yellow at the bottom of this green. As you travel up the green, you get to see a nice dark blue across the top, and which can be expected. Yellow and blue do make green. But it's interesting because the yellow and the blue are adding to this particular color, making its tone quite interesting in the writing samples. The one on the right I let dry for 10 minutes before I dunk it in the water. Now, as it flees up, more of the yellow, but more of the green is left behind as it's pushing up immediately. I see less of the yellow occur in this chromatography, and the blue across the top doesn't look quite as thick. It's just interesting because there's minor changes between the two of them. Resistance tests are done to see how this ink can be expected to perform on the page, and more importantly, how hard it could be to clean from your pens. Now, I let the smear dry for 3 days before testing it. Looking at the highlighter, it handles it very well. It has no real reaction to make having to highlight your notes be something that's concerning, so go ahead. Water completely reactivates, starts pulling most all of this ink up off the page. In the lighter area that's left, I can see the dots from the Rhodia dot pad showing through. Now, Pen Flush did everything that the bleach did, and it didn't do anything more. What it really makes me feel is that water is all that would be needed to get this out of your pen, because Flush isn't doing anything more for the additional chemicals. Bleach, as would be expected, completely removes it from the page, but please don't use bleach to get this ink from a pen. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average viscosity of 2.5, with the realm of normal being from 2.1 to 2.9. Private Reserve's Foam Green has a viscosity of 2.17, which makes it normal. The lower side of normal, but normal. To find my average dry times, I use my writing samples done with the extra fine and medium nib on Clairefontaine, Tomoe River, and Rhodia paper. For the inks I've tested, I've found an average dry time of 17 seconds, with a realm of normal being from 13 to 21 seconds. Private Reserve's Foam Green has an average dry time of 14 seconds. When I see inks do this, where their viscosity and their dry times are really very much the same on the bell curves, it makes me feel like these are perfectly made inks, because they feel just absolutely balanced, although there's nothing I can come up with to kind of clarify that. Now, let's look at the writing sample. I picked this ink up in sample form, and to keep my writing samples consistent, I use a Jinhao 159 with a Goulet 1.1 stub, a Jinhao X450 with a Goulet medium, and a Jinhao X750 with a Goulet extra fine. Let's look at the Clairefontaine. We get no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. We're not seeing any shading in this 1.1 writing. A noticeably different tone, a lighter tone with the extra fine. We get no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading with the extra fine, 9 seconds to dry. The medium gives us no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does give us shading throughout the writing sample. We see quite a bit of it in the word quick. We see quite a bit of it in the word brown and fox and jumps all the way through. Lots of really nice shading in this with a medium nib. And 15 seconds to dry. Now, when we look at the scrubby, the extra fine shows us no color variation. The medium shows us color variation, and that is what we got in the writing sample. The smear test says we likely cannot recover it. So, Tomoe River. We get no bleeding. We do get ghosting. The 1.1 has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shading.
The extra fine with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, no shade, 14 seconds to dry. It's the same tone that we got with the extra fine. And when we go to the medium, we get the same tone again. So this is an unchanged performance regardless of the nib on this paper. The medium has no feather, spread, halo, sheen, or shade. It took 21 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us no color variation, and we didn't get any. So we didn't expect any. The smear test says we can not recover it. Likely not recover it. I'm going to apologize because I think my stomach is making noises because I record this so early in the morning. And immediately after I do this part, I need to go eat. Looking at Rhodia paper. Rhodia gives us no bleeding, no ghosting. The 1.1 gives no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade with the 1.1. Noticeably lighter tone with the extra fine. It has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer shade throughout the writing. Not tremendous amounts of shade, but it is very nice in what's there. It's very gradual in its progress in and out. 10 seconds to dry. Now a noticeably darker tone is in medium, with no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. There is a little bits of shading. We see it on the F of fox. We see it on the Y of lazy. And that's about it. We really don't get to see it very much because this is a thicker ink and it really does spread out during that 15 seconds of dry time. Now the scrubby for both show us color variation. I don't know exactly how on that is here. We did get a little bit with the medium. It's minimal. Smear test says you could likely recover this. So I look at this on different tones of paper. Here's the yellow Rhodia. It has no bleeding, no ghosting. But what happens to the tone of that color? Well, with the extra fine, it's noticeably lighter. With the 1.1, it's noticeably lighter. But with the medium, almost no change. So the 1.1 on the yellow Rhodia has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and no shade. The extra fine has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen. It does offer little bits of shading, less noticeable, and that's because the tone change in not the writing itself entirely, but more it affects how much tone variation you get to see. So the shading that is there is less noticeable. 9 seconds to dry. The medium has no feather, no spread, no halo, no sheen, and I don't see any shading with the yellow background. That's what I mean about the paper altering how much of that shading you get to see. Now this took 13 seconds to dry. The scrubby for both show us color variation. It shows us more color variation than we got in the actual writing samples. The smear test says you could likely recover it. So I decided to test this on the copier papers. So this is 28-pound premium copy paper. It's got spots where it's wanting to bleed through, more with the medium than the extra fine in the medium writing. I don't worry about with the scrubby itself. The extra fine does have spots where it's getting ready to come through. It sinks in deep, but it's not coming through the paper. It's not destroying the whole experience. The medium at the top, it has feathering. It has tiny little feathering all over the place. It does show a little bit of spread. It has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. The extra fine has a little bit of feathering all over. It has a little bit of spread. It has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. It only took 1 second to dry. The scrubby shows us more color variation than we see in the writing. It shows color variation. We got none up here, but I really don't expect to get it on the copier paper. I was more surprised that it even showed here. 1 second to dry, you see that this does not smear at all. So I decided to look at 20-pound copier paper, the cheaper stuff that everybody always gives us to work on. And there's tons of bleeding. All of it bleeds. The medium at the top has spread. It has feather all over. It's gross. It has no halo, no sheen, and no shade. The extra fine looks more like a medium. It has feathering all over, but the feathering is actually smaller on the extra fine than it was on the medium. So it would be manageable, especially if you write small. If you write really large. And you don't have to be able to necessarily write that large, but this is a Pilot Metro medium nib, which writes more like a European fine, and you see that it comes straight through. So if you're a large writer, this is going to be good. A small writer, not so much. I don't typically write actually this small. I write a little bit larger. But on the writing samples, sometimes I just wind up writing smaller. It's the feeling of that small paper makes me want to write smaller. That 1.1 has no halo, no sheen, no shade. 1 second to dry. The scrubby shows us no color variation. We didn't get any color variation. The smear test says you're going to smear it. Or sorry, you're not smearing it. It goes straight in. It goes straight through. Look at that with that where large was written. If you could practically read it through the page. And that's all that I have for the writing sample.
Instead of finding inks that look like Private Reserve's foam green, I would prefer to find an ink that complements its color on the page. Now, I like greens with oranges, and I wanted a very interesting orange. I chose Noodler's Apache Sunset because this ink is a great tone, and combined with the Apache Sunset, it is amazing to look at. Before I give my opinion on this ink, I would ask, if you've enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. And if it's your first time here, I would invite you to subscribe. So what do I think of Private Reserve's foam green? I think the tone of green is very interesting. When I look at what goes on in the chromatography, I do wish a little more of that interesting, that it has an opportunity for a real something in the green that's not there. But the green is a very interesting and pleasant color. The tone of it is really quite nice, but I feel like it's missing out on an opportunity that it had that not all greens do have. Still a good ink. Thanks for watching.